This week, Allan and I are away at AsiaBSDCon. If you aren't there, you're missing out, so let's just be honest. But we will be back with a live episode next week. So, of course, we've been asked in previous weeks and months to have Allan tell us about ScaleEngine's use of BSD for a while now. So we want to take this time this week to share that with you. That, and of course, we're going to have some Beastie Bits for your consumption, so that's all going to be this week on BSD Now. BSD Now, episode 132, Scaling Up with BSD, recorded March 2nd, 2016. Hey, I'm your host, Chris Moore.
And I'm Allan Jude.
Yeah, we're glad to have you guys with us this week. So you heard me say March 2nd. That is correct. We're recording this a little bit early, matter of fact, right after last week's episode. And the reason for that is, at this moment, Allan and I are...
We'd definitely be asleep because it's like 3 a.m. Yeah. I'm just not sure if it's Tuesday or Thursday in Japan.
I have no idea, but based on jet lag, I could be awake right now.
I suppose
jet lagged and screwed up.
Knowing me,
it has happened a couple of years.
Knowing me, 4 o'clock would be about the time where I woke up after only a couple hours of sleep and then stared at the ceiling until it was time to get up.
That's right.
Although
So we'll see.
Japan doesn't ever hit me as badly as Europe does because you're going the other way.
True. I don't know. We'll see how it works out this year. But either way, we're in Tokyo.
Yes.
We are probably having a bunch of fun already and enjoying being there.
We hope you're there too, actually.
BSDCon. You should be. I realize it's a long way to go and it's hard to get to for some of us in North America and Europe, but it's well worth your time. Yep. So if you can do it one year, do definitely try and get out there. If you're local, then you got no excuse. You should be at Tokyo and doing AsiaBSDCon with us. So of course, we'll look forward to seeing you guys in person, those who can make it, and those who can't, we'll enjoy when we get back telling you all about how it went. Yes. So we'll leave you with that little tease. I'm sure it's going to be awesome. We'll come back with a whole slew of new interviews and lots of stuff to talk about. But of course, since this week is here and you're looking for a new episode, we got to give you something. Yes. We haven't missed a week yet, and we're not about to start now. So we got to do something a little different this week. So we're going to turn the tables a little bit and actually interview Allan, because we've had a lot of people asking us to talk about ScaleEngine and how he does stuff over there. So I'm going to do the interview with Allan.
Did that for half the interview the other week when we had you and Ken together on. So.
That's right. So now it's your turn to go under the microscope. So we'll get to that in just a moment. But before we do, we're going to mention the first sponsor this week, which is going to be, of course, IX Systems. And you should know the address by now. But hey, new tune-in factor and all that. Maybe this is the first episode you've ever seen. Who knows? But we will remind you, it's ixsystems.com/BSDNow. You want to go to that address, get signed up, talk to some of the sales engineers over there, and let them help build the system that you guys need that'll outperform all your wildest expectations. It'll be glorious. And of course, running on the latest Intel CPUs and hardware. So definitely want to check that out. And of course, it's IX, which means you get the white glove treatment, and they're going to know their stuff. So when you're getting ready to call up, have a few things in mind. So what are we going to try and do with this server? I mean, don't just say, I want this hardware. Tell them, like, this is what we're going to run on it. It's a mail server, or it's a web server, or file server, et cetera, et cetera. What's the minimum level of performance you're willing to live with? And then let them design the system based around those specs.
Yeah, so, it's like, I need a hyper-convergent server that can handle at least 50 VMs. Like, okay, you'll need this.
Well, we're gonna build to those specs and try and make sure it does exactly what you need it to do. And the cool thing is, since these guys know their stuff and they've been doing this for quite a while, the good news is they're probably going to be able to suggest things that maybe you haven't even thought of. Like, oh, well, if you do this instead, or buy this part that's cheaper or more expensive or whatever, you can get way better performance, save some money here, put it in here, and they're going to know all those little magic combinations just to make that system really
it's like, if you try to use that and that together, it's going to be weird. You might want to do it this way instead. But the other big thing for me has always been they have the full lineup of Intel processors, right? If I want, when I bought my little short depth router for my house, I wanted a nice low end one, low power. Give me the low voltage one. And then, when I bought the video transcoder ones, I was like, well, I need specific, it has to be, one of those like 3 Xeon E3s that ends in a 5 because that's the ones that have the graphics cards. Or it's like, oh, I want the latest Skylake because they have, faster, they can fit more RAM on the with the E3s, used to be limited to 32 gigs of RAM, but the Skylake ones can take 64 gigs.
Nice.
And it's like, so I want Skylake, and most other vendors aren't selling Skylake yet, but IX managed to get me some. And it's like,
Well, they're definitely good at that.
Yes.
Yeah, they will hook you up with whatever you need. So just call, explain the
Yep.
situation, and let them just build an awesome system for you. Again, it can be a crazy system up to that 90 drive system
Yep.
we talked about a couple of weeks back, all the way down to a FreeNAS Mini. Maybe
Yep.
you're a home user, and heck, maybe your significant other could get that for you as a Christmas or birthday present. I'm just
Yep.
saying,
It could-
for the tech person in your
Exactly.
life.
It can be, but just the Intel Atom, the small ones, up through the E3s or E5s, or if you're crazy, you can get an E7.
Sure.
It's like
sure.
maybe you need 8
everything.
CPUs that are 40 cores each in your machine.
They can do all
Yep.
that and everything in between. They've done some crazy builds over the years. So throw a challenge at them. Let them see what they can come up with.
Yeah.
I'm sure they will enjoy that challenge for sure. Okay. So let's get into this interview, Alan.
Yes.
So we really don't have to introduce you so much. But of course, since this is the first time we've really interviewed, we're going to go through a little bit of the motions here. So first of all, since you don't need an introduction, but maybe there's new people who don't know your story. So we've probably pieced together bits of it from hearing the show over the years. But if we haven't, or if you're new to the show, tell us about yourself, about your BSD story. Where did this all start?
Where did this? Well, I guess back in 1998, I finally got the internet at my house. I was very excited.
Okay.
And one of the first things
What dial-up? First of all, I have to ask, what speed?
this was 14.4 dial-up.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
14.4 dial-up, and then later I spent every dollar I owned to get a US Robotics 336 Sportster, which cost like $300 and something at the time. And that was, as a 14-year-old, that was all the money I had.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But my neighbor had shown me IRC, and I thought that was cool. So that's the very first thing I downloaded on my computer when I got the internet. And as I spent more and more time IRC and learning about it and how it worked, eventually, by I think later that year or early the next year, I wanted to run my own IRC server so that I could play with all the the administrative commands that you can't do as a regular
you want
user.
full control,
Yes.
right?
And so I asked some people about it, and they're like, "All right, so here's the program that you used to do, the IRC daemon." So I downloaded this, and it's a tart.gz, which I'd never seen before, but
Sure.
WinRAR can open it, so goody. And open it, and I'm looking through it, and I'm like, "There's no exe in here. How does this work?"
I think everybody has that story the first time they ran into some kind of tar file.
Yeah.
Well, what is this? How do I open this?
It's like there's lots of files in here, and there's like a README, but there's no exe files. And then they're like, "Oh, you need a shell account then if you don't have unit." I'm like, "Oh, a shell account, okay." So I looked around and I found this Canadian place that would let me, because I was like 14, I didn't have a credit card, so I found a Canadian place that would let me mail them a money order to pay them for the shell account. And so I mailed them money every month, and I got this shell account. And I think back then it was still Telnet, which is terrible, but
Nice.
so yeah, I Telnet into it, and I typed dir, and it's like, luckily they had aliased that to ls, so it worked. But quickly I learned the basic commands to move around, and I downloaded the tarball onto this machine. Actually, I think I used like Z modem or something to transfer it from my machine, which was really bad idea with my 14.4 still, I think, at the time. Instead of, I could have fetched over the T1 that this machine had. But anyway, so I extract the software and compile it and so on. But so that first shell account happened to be FreeBSD, but I didn't really know what that was at the time. And later, I also got exposed to a couple Linux machines, and I was like, these don't work as good. They don't come with GCC by default, and you can't compile anything. How does this even work? And, you get all these warnings about needing to compile spoof protection because it's not BSD. And so that was how I first got started. And then after a couple of years of that, I got to the point of being disappointed with all the shell providers I had ever used. They had all, the one in Canada had gone out of business after a fight with AT&T over denial of service attacks. And, a couple other ones have pretty fly-by-night shady things and never seemed to last very long. And I was like, well, I could do a better job than these people, right?
A lot of those in the 90s.
Yeah. And so I decided to do it myself. And so in Canada here, they had this, I think it was the provincial government was running called Summer Company. And so if you were a high school student, you would submit a business plan, and the top 5 students would be picked, and I would actually get paid or given $2,000 to start their business. And some like classes on how to run a business and everything for the summer. And at the end of the summer, if you successfully completed the classes, you would get another $2,000 in case your business didn't work out. So that over the course of the summer, you were guaranteed to at least make $2,000, which is reasonable for a student to make over the course of a summer. But if your business was successful, then you get to keep any money you made as well. So when I heard this, I was like, oh, so I wrote it all up. But because this was it was the early winter of 2002, I think. So it's right after the .com bomb, and so the people from the banks and so on that are on the little group that decides which business we get accepted were not very keen on this, internet hosting idea, and they didn't
done those before.
Yeah, they didn't really understand that. No, we're not really focused on hosting websites for $5. That's nobody's ever going to make money off that ever again. Mm-hmm. This is about, IRC and stuff. But trying to explain IRC to muggles is, it's a thing. And so I ended up getting into the top 10 because I had the well-written business plan and everything, but I didn't get picked to actually get the money from the government. But after seeing all the work I did and so on, my parents loaned me $1,000. And I spent most of that to buy the first server, which was, in a tower case. It wasn't a proper rack mount or anything. It was like an AMD 1700 Plus that we had cobbled together. My friend who was starting a business running a computer store. So we bought like a used case and power supply on eBay because they were cheaper than buying a new one, and really screwed down to only spend like $650 or something like that on this case or on the computer. And then I spent a lot of money on the internet connection, right? Because we put it in a co-location at the local cable company, and I started Shell Fusion, my little shell provider. And that went fairly well. We started turning a profit the first month, and by the end of the first year, it paid off my parents what I owed them, and was generally doing fairly well. And that helped me pay for college and go through that. And that was basically my first experience with BSD. Was
nice.
Just before Shell Fusion, I had helped some people who had BSD servers or Linux servers, and custom compiled Apache and PHP for them or whatever, as I had learned. But then when I started Shell Fusion, that was all right. I'm going to use FreeBSD because if I use Linux, I'll get rooted, because that's how it was at the time. And so I built this first server with FreeBSD and really learned a lot about locking it down, because you're inviting people to come use your machine and run their own software on it. So very quickly, people start doing things they shouldn't, or trying to use all the RAM. This machine only had 512 megabytes of RAM, and which wasn't more than modest at the time. Yeah, so it was above average, but not huge. And it only had one processor. Some of the crazy people had like 2 individual processors in the machine. It's crazy.
A real dual CPU.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, and so I had that, and then over the course of years, that eventually expanded to having like 6 of these machines, and having a billing system that would actually SSH in and run the commands to deploy new accounts on the servers and all the fancy stuff. And so I've basically been a professional FreeBSD sysadmin since 2002, doing that. But over the course of that, I learned a lot, especially about firewalls and managing users and stuff. And I learned all that and went to school for network engineering and security analysis, where I learned more about Linux. But I was lucky. The college I went to taught a very broad spectrum of stuff. So we actually did Linux and BSD, Windows and Novell, Cisco, and then a generic wireless that wasn't specific to Cisco, and a bunch of other stuff. And so I got a good cross-section of all the different stuff and kind of learned what's common between them and the basics. But yeah, that's how I got started with BSD. And I think while I was in college, one of my professors had gone to a BSDCon and was telling us about it, and I was like, wow, that sounds really fun. We should go. So I'm like, the next year, maybe I'll try to go. But, I was a student, and I don't drive, so I was like, how am I going to get to Ottawa? So it was always a thing I wanted to do, but never got around to doing. And then finally in 2012, a couple of years before that, when we started ScaleEngine in 2008, we were like, yeah, we should go to BSDCon now. And every time it was like, oh, shit, it was 2 weeks ago.
Sure.
Or whatever. It always like, oh,
always just messed.
Yeah, or too soon to make arrangements and so on. But finally, I wrote and organized it early enough, and then got to go to my first BSDCon, and that's where everything changed for me. Where I kind of went from just being a FreeBSD user who ran it and did stuff with it, but didn't have much interaction with the community other than the odd post to a mailing list or something. But when I was there and met some of the people, I got more excited about it, and
you got sucked in.
Yes.
Never get out.
Yeah.
Hotel California, baby.
Yeah. Yeah, Hotel Berkeley or something like that, we call it.
Yeah.
And so my first BSDCon went so well, we decided the night after the closing ceremony, when we were back to our hotel room, we're like, we're definitely coming back next year. And then it was like, well, why wait for next year? We just, at the closing ceremony, they were talking about this EuroBSDCon in Poland, and they were looking for talks. It's like, well, we could give a talk about our load balancer thing that we built. And so we submitted that and got to go to Poland. And that was my first time actually leaving Canada. And it was quite exciting for me. And I had a great time and met a bunch of people and got more and more sucked in. And as time went on, I eventually got sucked into ZFS. And that's the big one that did it for me. As I
That's where your life
learned,
really
yes, I learned more about ZFS because before we had a bunch of separate drives, all separately UFS, and we're in kind of backups and just hope the drive doesn't fail. And, if it does, we'll restore or whatever. But then as ScaleEngine got bigger and suddenly needed to store video, like when we first started ScaleEngine, we weren't a video streaming company. We were hosting websites and making them scale, hence the name, right?
Sure.
It was like a non-cloud way to actually make a website that can handle large amounts of traffic. We were like /dot proofing websites.
Sure.
And so our storage needs were not that high, right? We had the source files for websites, and so we just manually replicate them many places and not care if a drive dies.
A lot of rsync, I imagine.
And rsync and tar, basically. And then when we started doing video, it's all of a sudden we have these huge video files and lots of them, and we need to definitely not lose them because even though we don't have necessarily the authoritative copy, the customer has copies of their videos, it will take forever for them to re-upload them. Like, if they've uploaded hundreds of gigs, that could take a month for them to re-upload. And so they would be basically out of business that whole time. So if we lost their files, they'd be very upset with us, and it would be a big deal. And so we're like, well, there's hardware RAID, but and then we found about it ZFS. I'm like, oh, this looks really cool.
Yeah,
so
may solve a lot of problems.
Yes, we built our first ZFS server with totally the wrong hardware and totally a bad configuration. And, I wish we'd known about IX at the time. But I got started with ZFS, and as I learned more and more about it, I decided, the documentation was too sparse. And so on the train to BSDCon in 2013, I started writing lots of new stuff for the FreeBSD handbook about ZFS. And I went to one of Drew Levine's doc sprints that she has in the evenings at BSDCon, which is another great thing you should go to. And that's where I learned about how to actually change the way I worded some of the stuff to make it, you can't say you and I and so on. You make it more formal sounding, but also how to put it into the right format to actually go into the FreeBSD documentation system. And over the course of the next months, I basically built the whole FreeBSD handbook chapter on ZFS. And that meant that at BSDCon 2014, I was given my .commit bit. And that's, as I got more and more into that, I started playing with getting the FreeBSD installer to work with ZFS. And because, that involved changing source code. And then, I fixed some other bugs and worked on some other things. The other big one was the Lenovo X220s, which are a very, very popular laptop model. They're like a Sandy Bridge or Ivy Bridge, so the graphics work and everything. But they have this bug in the BIOS where if you try to do a GPT formatted disk, but boot without UEFI, it just gives an error. And you have to either use MBR or BSD partitioning and CSM, or use UEFI, which at the time FreeBSD didn't support very well, especially not with ZFS. And so I wanted this to work, and so I eventually figured out how to, by reading, somebody else figured out how to do it, but their procedure for it was quite onerous on the user. And so I built it into Gpart, the partition editor in FreeBSD, and made it so it's just one command and it just does the magic for you. But again, that was another modification to the base system. And over the time, I'd gotten really into libucl and trying to make config files that were great. The big one was Brian Drury added include statements to the new syslog config file. So now I could have, my Puppet or whatever would add the chunks to, user local etc new syslog.d nginx.conf, and it would rotate my nginx logs. It's like, this is amazing. I really love this. Problem is, I want to actually override the settings of one of the other, the varlog messages. I want to keep more copies of it or less copies of it, or it's on ZFS, so I don't want to compress it. It's like, so the way they did includes that doesn't quite work for that. And what I really want is includes in every config file.
Sure.
And so that's when I got really big into UCL.
Fit the bill.
And after working on a bunch of these things and kind of sticking my fingers in the base system everywhere, Baptiste Rosson proposed me for a commit bit. And then I became a source developer too. And said I started poking things I probably shouldn't have.
And now you're giving talks on bootloader and all kinds of stuff.
Well, modifying the bootloader, that was scary.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll get back to some of your projects here in a little bit. I got to ask some of these questions. So we got to talk a little bit about ScaleEngine today, though, because I know that's come up in questions in the past. So for the uninitiated, so give us just a high-level overview about what exactly ScaleEngine does, what services it provides, what do you guys do?
Right. So as I kind of mentioned, originally the idea was scaling websites. So one of the sites we used to host, or that I used to host at Shell Fusion before we started ScaleEngine, was hackintosh.org, which was a big website forum where they did all the rooting the iPhones back when the very first iPhones came out and so on. And it kind of taken over from originally the site was about buying x86 hardware and running Mac OS X on it.
Running your own.
And that website forum got a lot of traffic back in the day. And at the time, I think we had it with Apache, PHP, MySQL, whatever. And it was using up 4 whole servers, 100% CPU time all the time. And then my professor from college, Stefan Conter, and I had combined our 2 consulting businesses and created this new business. And we were sitting in our office looking at Identica, which was this open source Twitter clone, and the software was called Laconica. And Identica kept having basically the equivalent of the Twitter fail whale come up because they were having trouble scaling the software. Actually, turns out they were using Joyent, which I didn't know what was at the time. And actually, that was when I was looking into what Joyent was, is the first time I actually heard of ZFS. Although I didn't know what it was, and I was like, oh, it's Solaris. I don't.
Yeah, that's something else.
I don't know anything about that. Whatever. But yeah, so Joyent would return this error message no suitable node to service your request or whatever. And they're having trouble scaling the software. Well, in our office, we had this old Google server we had bought from a computer recycler. It was an old machine that actually Google had used in their data centers. It was just a dual socket, single core Xeon system with a slightly modified BIOS that had more options in it. And, it said Google when you booted it. It was just a slightly customized gigabyte motherboard. But so we had this server and we set up FreeBSD with Nginx, which Stefan had been quite into for quite a while. He taught us how to do reverse proxy to an Apache for it in our network engineering classes in 2005, right? Most people hadn't heard of Nginx yet at this point. But yeah, it was Nginx, FreeBSD, MySQL, and PHP. Because Laconica software already had built in using memcache to cache stuff, letting you configure, these SQL queries are read-only, so they can go to a slave for reading, and so that you're not overloading the master that handles the writes and so on. So the software is all architected in a way to be like, this should be really easy to scale. Why is they having so much trouble with it? And so we kind of came up with our own stack based on FreeBSD, and it actually worked very well. And we're like, now what we got to do is get people to pay us to do this.
Right.
And so we moved the Hackintosh people over. Actually, it was Stefan had a student who ran a big website forum they were having kind of similar problems, and so we got them as well, and a couple other sites, and so that's what we called that ScaleEngine, because it was the back end engine for your website, and they could scale up and down. And basically, instead of charging a flat monthly fee or something, we actually charged you we used the old BSD accounting system to measure how much CPU time your processes use. So we ran each customer's PHP processes in a jail as a user, and then counted how much CPU time that user used and billed you for it. And we actually we installed Google's patches for MySQL that eventually became MariaDB, that let you count SQL queries per MySQL user. And so we had a certain rate for selects versus inserts and so on. And we basically charge you for how much CPU time you used, how much bandwidth, and how much SQL queries you did. And that let us be able to scale this. And that was okay at first, but not many people were doing it, and a lot of people would just go to the cloud instead because, I don't know why actually. Anyway.
Just because they could.
We've never been that good at marketing. So that we had that. But the one of the other forums we had did a lot with images. So they have very big high-res images. And they were kind of messing up our 95th percentile. The way we bought bandwidth was we had a 100 megabit connection, but we only guaranteed that we buy 10 megabits a month. And if we went over, it was more expensive per megabit than if we committed to it. And so they were kind of warping our 95th percentile by using too much during peak times. And so we rented an extra server at a data center on the West Coast and offloaded images via rsync to that one. So just all the images would come from over there, and the website would run off our place with more limited bandwidth. But then users can say, well, in Germany, the files download really slowly. So okay, so we put a server in Germany and rsync, and then before too long, we had invented a CDN where we were offloading the images to servers we had spread out across the globe. And so then we're like, oh, and then this actually seems more useful to some people. And then we got the contract to host a big advertising network. Well, actually, it wasn't big at the time. When it started out, they were fairly small, but at their peak, they were doing like 10 billion HTTP requests a month. So that's thousands a second, 24/7, with huge peaks up to like 10,000 a second. And so our CDN very quickly grew really big.
Sure.
And the caches for this, because the advertising network was a lot of very small images. This one was a related content engine. So instead of like a big banner ad, they would show 6 very small images of like related products to whatever the blog post was about. And so that was 6 images for every page load. So they would just have like millions and millions of little files. And so ZFS, turns out, is really good at that. Because you can tell it, hey, cache lots of metadata about these little files. So when you go to look up a file, you don't have to, you get cache hits on all the directory entries, and you can get the file really quick. And so that's how we kind of switched from using ZFS just as the storage for our bulk storage of stuff, but we needed it for our edges too.
Accelerating.
Yeah. And so that's how we ended up being a CDN. We mostly did HTTP then. And then a radio station in Sweden got in touch with us and was like, we actually want to stream live video of our DJs playing the music. And we're like, we had been looking at video streaming software because we had a local client left over from our consulting business that we had been working on before we started ScaleEngine, that wanted to do, it was HR software. And so if you wanted to apply for a job, you go to this website and submit your resume, but also via your webcam with Flash would record a little introduction thing, right? Answers some stock interview questions. So they could really quickly interview a bunch of people to kind of pre-screen people before they did the actual interviews. And so we've been playing with this video server software. And so when we had a request for somebody who was willing to pay us right now to do video streaming, we were like, sure. And so because they were in Finland, we set it up on the server we had in Germany for distributing these images. And it went fairly well. But then one day they had a lot more people than expected watching the stream, and we didn't have enough bandwidth. So then we had to get more servers in Europe and switch from, 100 megabit servers to gigabit servers. And we scaled that up, and that's how we got into video. And then very quickly, video took over almost everything. We still do we still do HTTP CDN for things like PCBSD actually, but video is our main focus now. And the nice thing is that it's given us the opportunity to offer free video streaming for things like Bayfug, PDX, Linux, which is a Unix user group, NYCBSDCon. There's a Japanese user group that we do the live streaming for, and we stream AsiaBSDCon.
Yeah, which you might be able to watch right now.
Yes. Sorry for the time zones, but there's nothing I can do about that.
Yeah. He can't fix that with the CDN.
Yeah.
But still, that's cool. So I assume, or maybe you do or don't, but do you run 100% BSD across your infrastructure?
Almost.
Almost.
Yes. Right. So we have about 100 servers, and like 93 of them or something like that are FreeBSD. So almost exclusively FreeBSD.
Okay, so what are the other ones then? The Linux boxes?
Yeah, so the commercial software we use to do the live streaming, if we want to do video transcoding, which is you send us a high bitrate video stream, and we make lower bitrate versions of it, and the user can auto switch between them based on their bandwidth or whatever. So that if you're watching on a phone, you don't need to download the 2 megabit per second stream. The software comes with the software is Java, and so it works perfectly fine on FreeBSD. So we just stick it into jail, and it works great. But for the video transcoding, it uses some native Linux libraries, some like shared object files, and those we had trouble getting. Those don't work on FreeBSD. Now that we have the 64-bit Linux emulation, I might be able to get it to work. Last time I tried, the problem was when Java detects that it's Linux, it does the Linux way to try to get the MAC address from the network card for the licensing, and that doesn't work on FreeBSD. Whereas when it's running under FreeBSD, it does the right thing.
Is that just a missing syscall?
I'm not sure.
Or something?
Or not MAP3, and it's doing something weird with IPv6, and it's just, I haven't had time to dig into it.
Well, maybe that'll be your talk for next year's AsiaBSDCon, how you resolve that.
I would very much like to get rid of these couple of separate Linux boxes, because they really drive me nuts. Okay. Although, as I think you're going to get to in the next question, that might not be possible anymore because of new complications.
Sure. So, of course, we know you guys are heavy ZFS users. So what specific BSD technologies are you using to deploy bits around the world and make all this happen?
Right. So, yes, on top of lots of ZFS, we use lots of jails because we, on the machines we own in our main data center, everything's in a jail because we can actually pick up the jail and move it to a different machine, which makes it very handy for, migrating stuff or downtime or whatever. Very soon we'll actually be moving most of our core storage from one data center to a different data center. And the fact that, things like our billing system and our customer database and stuff are in jails that I can pick up and move means that I can move everything off a couple of the servers to other servers, move those servers to the new data center, and then move things back with very, very minimal downtime. It'll be, we love that. And ZFS means we can do, before when we had to do that, we'd like rsync the jails.
Sure.
And so, especially with database servers, if it's just slow and terrible. But with ZFS, we can do it the block incremental replication, which means that we can do it really, really fast, right? So we just snapshot the jail, or stop the jail, snapshot it, transfer it to the other machine, start it up, and then when we move the machine, we only have to replicate the difference back, and we're good to go. And we can do it incrementally so that we can get it so that so the total downtime can just be a couple of seconds.
That's nice. That's nice.
What else do we use? We use the accept filters, which is built in. Basically, the FreeBSD kernel will accept connections on port 80 and won't tell the web server about it until the user's actually sent the request. So instead of, with the typical process, the user connects and the kernel's like, hey, web server, there's a user. And the user then the web server accepts that socket, sends the packet back, and then the user sends their, HTTP GET request, and then the kernel's like, hey, there's new data, and the web server picks it up, and it goes back and forth quite a few times. With accept filters, the kernel sits there, it sees the connection, the kernel accepts it for you, and then sends a reply to the user, and then the user sends the request, and then the kernel passes that whole thing off to the applications like, hey, new connection, here's the request, and the web server just answers and then can close the socket and get back to its other work. So that helps us scale quite a bit.
It's down a couple trips.
Yeah. We really use package now. We used to build everything from ports using like Portmaster or something. I forget what it was back then. But now we use package. So we have a Poudriere where we compile our own packages with all of our custom options and just push those out. It really has been very nice. We use sysrc with built into our Puppet scripts to change config files. And we're looking very much forward to replacing all the other config files with UCL so we can do something similar. Although, with new syslog, we want to kind of separate what ships as the default into a file you never modify and then have overrides to it, kind of like you do with rc.conf, instead of having it the way it is, because currently our Puppet pushes out a specific version of newsyslog.conf that it has to be compatible with the oldest version of FreeBSD left in our infrastructure, which, means that we miss out on using the new feature on new systems, and it's just not as nice as we'd like it to be.
Okay.
And then we have some interesting ideas for new things that will be coming up. We're hoping to use ZFS boot environments, kind of with the import-export type idea you had, to be able to push system updates to our servers. So as as we build our own snapshot of FreeBSD 11 and push it to every one of our servers, but somehow on those servers not clobber the etc that's specific to that server. So that we can follow FreeBSD head, but in a slightly more controlled fashion.
Well, so the import-export stuff's in upstream,
right.
BSDNow at the moment. You could basically use that and then script some Etsy merging thing.
Yeah.
Keeps track of your changes.
But I'm looking at if I can't finagle a way to actually just keep etc as a separate data set that's outside the boot environment and deal with it that way.
You could. I mean, if you just added etc as a separate data set,
but then it has to be there before the rest of the file systems are mounted.
Sure.
And how do you make it do that? Because even you could normally kind of cheat that with like fstab, but you don't have an fstab if you don't have it.
It's not there yet.
So I'm still planning on that one, trying to work out the best way to do that.
What you come up with, but okay.
What other technologies? We use IPFW for NAT and traffic shaping. We don't do much traffic shaping anymore, but it was a big deal when we had the 95th percentile problem in the beginning. But also, even now, that one of the co-locations we're at, where you only have 200 megabits for our websites and stuff, and sometimes we need to throttle people doing things, and so we do a lot of dummy net and so on. So we're also interested in the newer dummy net stuff to handle higher bandwidth. As we're looking at having 10 gig links for a bunch of our servers, having some forms of traffic shaping would be interesting for that. And actually, from the BSDCon list of talks, the per flow traffic shaping, where we want to make sure that, for the PCBSD mirrors, that one person that happens to have a gigabit connection isn't using up all the bandwidth and hurting other people.
Okay. Well, hey, I know in past episodes you've mentioned some of the new IX boxes you got and how you're going to do some video transcoding on that. So how are you doing that? Are those running BSD, or are you having to put Linux on them, or do some Linux simulation?
So the new video transcoding, so up until now, all the video transcoding we did was on the CPU. And so we had hopes that one we will be able to get work with the FreeBSD Linux emulation and not have to use Linux.
Sure.
But now we're looking at transcoding using the Intel GPU. And that gets much more complicated. Direct support for that isn't even built into Linux. You get a custom binary driver thing from Intel, and you have to follow some Intel instructions, and it only works with very specific versions of Linux, not even just any Linux. It's like, nope, CentOS 7.2 won't work. It has to be 7.1. And it's like, so our hopes of getting that working under FreeBSD are a little less, although in having so much trouble with it getting working on Linux, at one point as a lark, I'm just like, oh, look, one of the important libraries for this is in FreeBSD ports. Oh, it looks like FreeBSD might just work with it. So
okay.
if I get time to play with that, which I don't know when I would ever do that,
Right.
I might be able to get FFmpeg to offload video transcoding to the GPU. If we do, there might be hope of getting that to work with our video software, but probably not, because the commercial software only compiles against the Intel custom library, which only compiles against this version of Linux, which makes my life complicated.
Foiled.
Yeah, but it's like, well, Nginx has some support built in, and using FFmpeg, we probably could, but, is it worth all the work just to avoid using Linux on a couple of machines?
Okay.
Kind of.
Maybe we'll follow
Yes.
along with that. I'm sure down the road you may be like, Eureka, I got it working.
Yes,
Last week.
I very much look forward to that day, because as part of supporting the newer GPUs, Intel moved the supported version of the operating system from. Actually, part of the reason was when we first started looking at the video transcoding, we were going to have to use Ubuntu 12.04, which is from 2012. Because 14.04 had some bug and it didn't work, and they weren't going to support the 15.06 or whatever, and and then, but when we did when we done CPU transcoding on Linux, we'd always use CentOS, because when I was in college, that was the Linux I learned that I actually knew how to use. But Intel switched their reference one to CentOS 7, which uses systemd. And everything is different.
Sure. Relearn everything. Everything you know is wrong.
Ifconfig is not installed by default. You have to add it. They have some other command that does weird things. The interfaces are not called ETH0 anymore. It's like ENO, as in the letter O, not a zero, to O. Or so there's like weird things happening. And it's like, what does that even mean? At least ETH, I knew that was for Ethernet, but what does ENO2 mean? Weirdness.
I'm sure there's some perfectly logical explanation.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just the Linux makes me even more frustrated. I thought CentOS 6 was bad, while systemd made it worse.
Okay. Well, interesting. So you told us, you kind of already answered this next question here about how you got your start as a doc committer and how to source, etc. Any other projects you've worked on that you didn't mention? I know you said installer.
Yep. So I did the documentation installer.
Doing the bootloader stuff for Jelly.
Yep, doing the bootloader stuff. I did some stuff on Gpart for the Lenovo fix, and that went in the installer. But also, I added some missing GPT ID types for the Chromebooks, because it was Peter Grehan from Beehive had been playing with one of those. I've done a couple other various commits. I did some man page fixes.
Did you do some of the Linux ports as well?
Yes, I did. I did the first draft of the 64-bit stuff. Luckily, other people carried that to the finish line. But I machine generated machine gun generated with my keyboard and some scripting to generate the first versions of the 64-bit ports, because I was trying to solve my transcoding on Linux problem. But sadly, I ran out of time to play with that. But luckily, yes, that got in and is available to people, and will be there when I get time to get back to it.
Yeah, you have something to play with when you go back.
Yeah, the big things I'm working on now is libucl stuff. I have newsyslog.conf and login.conf pretty much converted. I just need to clean those up and get them updated in Fabricator and get them approved.
Nice. Well,
yeah.
Okay, so speaking of time, it seems like we complain a lot about there's just not enough time to mess with all this. If time wasn't an issue, what would be like one big thing you'd love to see land in BSD?
I'd love to learn more about ZFS and do more with it. I've dug into the code a little bit. I have a project almost finished. Two projects on ZFS I didn't talk about. One of them was kind of like zpool version or whatever, where you can find out what the new feature flags are, but for the command line interface. So I took over maintainership of ZXfer, a shell script for replicating ZFS datasets from one machine to another. Or one pool to another, maybe on different machines, maybe not, whatever. And the biggest problem I have there is, as ZFS changes, how do I tell which features I can use? Specifically, even back before OpenZFS, when we had ZFS zpool version 28, in FreeBSD 9, and then same version 28 in 9.1, except it also had some improvements. Like when you did ZFS send, you could do -v and it would tell you, or -nv and it would tell you how big it would have been. And then you could use that to draw a progress bar.
Sure.
Well, because both are v28, there was no real way to tell if the computer you're running on had that feature or not, other than actually looking at the FreeBSD version. But if I want the script to support Solaris, Linux, Illumos, Mac, everything, every different place you can run OpenZFS, I don't want to just have the shell script have a giant database of operating system version numbers mapped to what ZFS features they support. And so the proposal, the idea at the moment is something like the ZFS API command that just prints out a list of what features it supports that are different than what came with like ZFS V5000, right? So it'd be like, oh, now on this version, ZFS set, you can specify multiple properties at once instead of having to do them separately.
Sure.
Back when nice. IOHive used ZFS properties, that probably would have been an optimization that would save many seconds. Sorry, IOCage,
sure, Sure.
It would have helped a bit, although switching to UCL was much better, right?
Faster, yep.
But there's things like that, or resumable send. That's not actually a feature flag because it doesn't change the on-disk format. But I need a reliable way other than ZFS help grep resume or whatever to tell if a version, if both machines support resuming before I try to resume a send, and a bunch of things like that. And so that's one of them. The other one is ZFS holds. When you put a hold on a data set, how, I have 100 snapshots and I put a hold on the middle one. How can I look at just the data set and say, find me every hold that's stopping me from deleting this whole data set? And so I actually came up with one way, and part of it's actually committed into FreeBSD, but I've since come up with a better way, so I need to revert that one and rewrite it.
Okay.
But that will allow you to do hold, release, and holds on entire ranges. So very quickly say, I want to hold all of these snapshots, or I want to release all of these snapshots, or I want to find all the holds on this range of snapshots. And so that, and the recent couple of weeks I've been trying to help solve this problem with ZFS memory usage with FreeBSD when you build up a lot of metadata. And I just wish I had time to learn more about ZFS, the internals, and the interactions with the FreeBSD kernel to keep working on stuff.
Well, it seems like you're well on your way there, considering you've co-authored a book about it.
Well, yeah, so the book's mostly about the user side of ZFS than the internals, though. Even with this whole second book, we didn't really dig into the internals.
So you basically want to clone Matt Aaron's brain.
Yeah. If I could download that would be great.
That's great.
The matrix, and just hook up the matrix, ZFS send, receive, be all done.
Oh, great.
If my brain was actually ZFS and would promise never to lose stuff, that would be very useful.
Cool. Okay, well, so on the personal side, since we don't always get into that on the show, any other hobbies or interests that maybe listeners would be interested to know about you?
Not that many. FreeBSD is my hobby, so I get to do it a lot. That's helped a lot. That's, the working on the bootloader wasn't something I did for work. It was something I did because I wanted ZFS boot environments to work for everybody.
Sure.
That one was kind of a little weird because unlike some of my other stuff I worked on, it's not even something I will ever use. I don't generally encrypt the disk on my laptop because all it has is FreeBSD source code.
You say that now, but someday down the road you'll be like, maybe it's handy that I can do that.
Yeah. But it isn't actually an immediate need of mine that I was scratching an itch for. I like skiing. That's a nice hobby, although I don't get to do it very often, but maybe I'll have to get with some of the people in like Colorado or whatever and organize a FreeBSD skiing trip or something.
Cool. Yeah. Okay. Well, hey, thanks for taking the time to do this today. Hopefully we've cleared up everything where people have had questions about what exactly you do and a little bit more about the Allan Jude behind the show.
Yes.
Great. Well, cool. Well, we appreciate it. We'll be back with a little bit more of the show in just a moment. Okay, we're back. We got some Beastie Bits to bring you this week, so you guys have some extra stories to enjoy while we're gone. So we'll get right into those, but first we want to hit the DigitalOcean ad this week. So of course, DigitalOcean.com. Go there, get signed up, create your account, start up some droplets. Of course, you can put a free BSD in those natively. You can, if you have to run Linux, they do offer that as well. But also you can load up OpenBSD and NetBSD. So if you want those, just do a quick Google search or look through our site. That did get mentioned in previous episodes.
We have tutorials for both of those.
That's right. So totally doable. And of course, they make it super easy to do. Got your nice HTML5 console set up. So it's real easy to administrate the droplets. Once you get them going there, everything's available via an API as well. So you can programmatically do neat things like, creating and tearing down and starting and stopping the droplets as you need them. And of course, they're all backed by SSDs. So everything is just really flipping fast. And heck, for $5 a month, they give you a terabyte of transfer, which is just crazy. But very helpful, very helpful. And of course, don't forget to use the code FreeBSDNow. That'll give you a $10 credit. So if you're going to run a droplet, one of the $5 a month ones, heck, that's 2 months free, where you can try it out, get it all set up before you even really start paying for it. So definitely go get signed up today. You could definitely get a droplet spun up in less than 60 seconds. So before we get through the first story here for the Beastie Bits.
Yep. And they have lots of locations to choose from: San Francisco, New York, Toronto, London, Amsterdam, Frankfurt, and Singapore.
Okay, great.
So wherever you are in the world, that you can get one near you and they have a speed test site where you can go and, if you're somewhere in Europe and you're like, well, which one of those 3 locations is best for me? You can give them all a try and see.
That's right. That's right. Based on your route, maybe it may not be the one you thought, but it's good that you can check that out real easily. Okay, so let's get into the Beastie Bits. So first up, we have a link here to a GitHub site where we're showing how you can get NetBSD on an RPI 0.
Yes, this is the D message of it booting up.
Okay, well, great. Well, it looks like that's a thing now. So if you have one of those
Of course it runs NetBSD, right?
Of course it runs NetBSD. Everything runs on NetBSD. Okay, so what's this Dragonfly? We have some tips for printing with cups. Looks like some things...
If you're trying to use cups to print from Dragonfly, they have tips like removing the LPR and other LP commands, like setting no LPR equals true in your make.conf, and install your real cups binaries will be in user local, and then you need to change the permissions on the ULPT, which would be the USB printing, but you can just has the details on how to do that with devfs, and this is by just making sure you use the user local versions of the LP tools, you can use cups to print to your new printer. Great.
Okay, next up we have an article over at opensense.org talking about how you can fight fraudulent networks that are using SSL connections blacklisting with OpenSense. So basically it blocks known bad certificates that are listed at abuse.ch. So it sounds like something you definitely may want to turn on there.
Yeah, they say... as of version 16.1.1, OpenSense includes SSL blacklisting based on SSL fingerprinting of malicious SSL certificates. The SSL blacklist is provided freely by abuse.ch, and we've been granted approval to include that list in OpenSense. So, when certificates are getting, when somebody breaks into a certificate authority or otherwise manages to get a fake certificate for Gmail, when those get blocked, they get listed at abuse.ch, and your OpenSense can automatically block your users from getting sucked into it. They also have a block for the photo Trojan, or Fado. I don't know how you're supposed to pronounce that, but it's a e-banking Trojan that tries to steal information from victims' computers, such as credit card details and their banking login and password. So with that built in, you can also automatically protect your users from that. So
nice.
Yes, definitely an interesting feature.
Okay. So next up, we have a fix for NetBSD users. It looks like for NetBSD 7.0 on KVM-based virtual machines.
Yeah.
So if you that, you may want to check this out.
Yeah. During the installer phase of running NetBSD 7, it kernel panicked here, and Christos, who's been on the show before, made a fix for it in the busdma.c. And so if you grab their daily build mini ISO and install from that, it will work, and you can use that.
Okay. So also we have next, Michael W. Lucas's new book, FreeBSD Mastery Specialty File Systems, is now escaping. So to get your hands on one of those.
Yes, the cover looks really cool.
Yeah, I was going to say, what is the artwork on this one? I need to look at it.
So Beastie is driving a series of flying cars.
Nice.
And acting as some kind of like
it.
taxi or something. It's also a wraparound
like Jules
cover.
Verne type stuff.
Yeah,
It's
a wraparound cover. So the picture continues all the way across to the back.
nice. I
Yeah,
like that.
that's very cool.
Michael W. Lucas, he needs to do like the complete collection or something where you can buy it all in one box set.
I think the idea is that at the end there'll be like a sleeve that holds all of them together, and it'll be the new like absolute FreeBSD. Will be just read all of these books.
Nice. Okay, so speaking of Michael W. Lucas, up on his site we have the Penguicon Lucas Tech Track as well to bring you.
So Penguicon is a local tech, science fiction, maker, assorted random thing conference in Michigan. And since that's Michael's backyard, he'll be there and he'll be talking about PAM, based on his new book that he's working on, PAM Mastery, the ZFS file system, networking for system administrators, encrypted backups with TarSnap, and running the BSD operating systems in 2016, plus being part of a sysadmin panel of senior sysadmins to talk about that stuff.
Okay. Very cool.
So he also took the same approach for the conference of just carpet bomb them with proposals and hope they accept a couple, except for they accepted like all of them.
Yeah, he got bit by it.
Yep.
Now you're going to be very busy.
Yep.
Well, cool. Okay, so next up, FreeBSD-based Nginx and FFmpeg camera recording and live streaming. So Unix Men got another how-to up on their site here. That's pretty cool.
So this is how you can use FFmpeg on FreeBSD 10 to record from a camera or live stream from a camera.
Okay.
And they've also set it up so you can do with FF Server or with Nginx's RTMP support and all the different protocols.
I can see how maybe making a security camera system or something might be pretty cool.
But
do that for a new server.
Yeah, and we've actually done this for ScaleEngine, where we can use FFmpeg to take a video recording of a file and send it as a stream for testing, or use it to pipe stuff from a USB camera or something connected to a Raspberry Pi and actually send the video off to ScaleEngine for a live stream.
Okay.
But they also show here how to view it in VLC and your web browser. Just getting all that set up.
You just need to hook it up to a motion detector. So if somebody opens the door to the server room, like it records that and then keeps going.
Yeah, where it's basically constantly recording a small buffer, but not keeping it until the motion detector, and then it starts. The best part, if you configure right, you can make it start 5 seconds ago, so that you detect the motion and then start recording. You start recording and watch the motion start. If you keep that buffer just right.
Sounds neat.
I think one of our recent tutorials talked about a software to do that. Open something. But anyway,
I'll have to refer back to our own site.
This whole tutorial gives you all the stuff for both input and output from different protocols to different cameras or machines, and how to set it all up.
Okay.
And you can see they have live video cameras of a warehouse or whatever else they want to do. And it's all the tutorial you need to do it with FFmpeg Nginx on FreeBSD. And the best part is pretty much all would just work on any BSD that has the same stuff via ports or packages or package source or whatever you want to call it.
And use it as a generic guide and do the same on Open or something.
Yep.
Nice. Okay, so next up is something I've been working on actually the last couple of weeks, a call for testing that I'm putting out there. So we have a new Jenkins builder for FreeNAS and PCBSD, so you can build them yourself. And I have a link to the GitHub site, and there's some instructions. But basically, you clone this, you type make Jenkins, and answer a question if you want it to be a master or a node. So most likely you want a master, but when you do that, it'll actually go through the process of setting up Jenkins on the box, and it'll set up a Jenkins environment with all the builds predefined. So when it's all said and done, it takes a couple minutes, and not really anything else you have to do at that point. It just is downloading things. But when it's done, you can just open up your web browser, and all of a sudden you have a Jenkins instance all set up, and you can click build on different FreeNAS builds or PCBSD, and it'll do it and come back later, and you'll have ISOs ready to go.
Nice.
So that's out. I'm asking people to test that, try it out, and the instructions are all up on the site. It should be pretty simple, so I'm not going to go through them all here, but definitely check that out if you want to try building them on your own. And to go along with that, some status updates on our SysADM project. I've also updated the instructions for both SysADM server and SysADM client. So if you want to follow along and start building those, you're welcome to try that. We have the instructions on how to build them and what's required. I recommend doing it on a current box if you have like a PCBSD current installed, although you could do it on 10.2 or 10.3 or whatever. But at this point, the client works well enough. You can now start associating with the server and doing some things like badmin has some support. Of course, the graphical top, and we're working on IO Hive as well right now, so you can do VM management. So some of the beginnings, this is very, very, very early alpha, but it's starting to actually do useful work. So
yes,
definitely if you want to check it out and play with it or contribute, it's ready to do that now.
And I love the README includes instructions on how to contribute your own new API calls and building new classes for those API calls and how to test them.
That's right. We have a little tester built in too. And what's cool about the tester is if you send a pull request, attach the tester output with your git commit log. And we have a script set up so that when GitHub does a commit and we send an email out, we'll flag that as requiring documentation. And that way Drew sees it and knows, hey, we got a new API call. I need to document this.
Nice.
So it works pretty well.
Yes.
Okay. So, of course, let me know. Send me feedback. I'm going to be showing some of this off at BeehiveCon over at AsiaBSDCon about now. So if you have any feedback, send it over, and we'll, of course, take that into account as we continue heavy development on this.
So are you going to start a Beehive on your laptop from your phone?
I know.
Okay.
I might start a Beehive running on the server at the house, though, from my laptop in Tokyo, which could be kind of cool.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
This is all running remote.
I guess, you haven't had time to build the phone client yet, have you?
Yeah, no phone client yet. So we're focusing purely on the desktop side right now. But the plan is down the road to then take that and do a phone client as well.
Nice.
So one thing at a time, though. We're a small team. Come on.
Yes.
Give us a chance. Okay, well, that wraps up the Beastie Bits for the week. So the last sponsor we need to get to, of course, is going to be Tarsnap. So tarsnap.com/BSDNow. Go grab a client right now. Don't wait. If you're not doing backups, I mean, that's just a disaster waiting to happen. It's like having a faulty toaster in the house where you're like, I know that's going to start a fire someday, but I'll worry about it next week. No. Bad idea. You need to take care of something like that now.
Yep.
And not having good backups is just a guarantee that you're going to lose data down the road. It just happens to everyone. So let's just head it off to the past.
It always happens at the most inconvenient time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's right. You take that week off from work and you're like, yay, it's the holidays. I'm going to spend time with the family. And then your system crashes and you lose all your file server or something's going to happen.
Or, you're almost finished this big project and you've managed to, write this huge amount of code and then it's all gone.
Yes. So don't be that person, because enough of us have been that person that we're trying to share our wisdom and experience with you so you don't have to be that person down the road. So get set up today with Tarsnap. Do your backups because they're encrypted. You don't have to worry about anybody snooping what you're backing up on the remote end. You can verify that it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do because it's open source. So check it out, compile it yourself so you don't even have to trust the binaries, and start doing your backups today. And of course, if you talk to anyone over at Tarsnap, mention that you heard about it here on BSD Now, because we like to let them know that our fans are out there using it. Okay, so we're going to wrap up the show here. So, of course, we'll be back next week with a live episode, and, of course, a lot of stories to tell about Tokyo. Hopefully we'll be awake. I'll probably be drinking a lot of coffee that morning because...
Yeah, but I guess we get home Monday afternoon, right? That's when I do.
I get home Monday night at like 9 p.m. or something, so I'll have a day to sleep a little bit and get over something.
I think I'll get home slightly. I think I get home at like 6-ish.
Yeah, I think I have to go through Detroit. Well, I leave at 6 p.m. on Monday from Tokyo and then get back.
I think I leave
9 p.m.
slightly earlier.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have a nice full day where I don't have to rush to the airport, which is kind of cool.
I do prefer that. I got to last year I got to walk around the back alleys of Akihabara with Warner Losh and Ed Mast, and I bought a Raspberry Pi, and
that's where you find the best stuff.
Yeah,
I've found. So don't be scared of those back alleys down there. Anyway, we'll be back. Lots of new stories, lots of stuff to talk about, lots of interviews. So I'm sure we'll have all that to tease you with and bring in future episodes. But of course, in the meantime, we still need you to send stuff in. So if you have questions, send it on in. We'll get it answered as soon as we get back. If you have comments or you have any show ideas or topics, or maybe you found a story while you're out and you want to send it over, make sure we mention it on the show. We will do that. Send it in. Of course, we may not reply right away. We'll probably just wait and do it on the show live. So be sure to tune in and see what we ended up covering. And of course, we'll look forward to interacting with you same time next week.